Big Pharma is great at pushing unnecessary drugs onto American consumers. The biggest problem is that many of the industry's latest blockbuster drugs are less effective and less safe than the drugs that they've been out with for decades. Joining me now to talk about one of the latest blockbuster drug failures is Ned McWilliams. Ned McWilliams, Xarelto, the killer drug of the week. When does it stop? I mean, this is almost black humor, what we see coming out of the FDA nowadays.
Well, it's just the same story over and over again, unfortunately. Yeah, well, Xarelto, it's the latest one in this whole line of drugs that's doing the same thing. Literally hundreds, if not thousands of people bleeding to death because of the drug.
Okay, lay it out for us. What is the drug? Why do people take it? Why don't doctors know that they shouldn't give it to their patients?
It's called Xarelto. It's part of this whole new class of drugs that came out with Pradaxa and also a drug called Eliquis. They're all meant to replace warfarin, and it's for elderly folks who have atrial fibrillation, which is just a heart arrhythmia. The thing is that that's a very large population. We're talking about millions of Americans with atrial fibrillation who they're trying to push these drugs on through all the direct-to-consumer advertising that I'm sure everyone's seen. But what I think people don't know is that the people that have actually investigated the safety of this drug, like the two primary doctors at the FDA, they actually voted against this drug getting approved. They said it should not get approved. They said it doesn't look safe. It doesn't look effective. And they gave very good, explicit, specific reasons. And the bureaucrats just vetoed them, trumped them.
Why? I mean, because they were. We've seen so many times where the bureaucrats actually end up working for the industry. In other words, the bureaucrats working their day one, day two, the industry comes and says, "Hey, we'd like to give you a raise of $300,000. Oh, by the way, what about helping us with this drug?" It's bribery. I mean, it's nothing short of bribery.
I think it's a combination of the revolving door you see between industry and the regulators, but also the thing that I think you coined, the captive agency. We have this agency where they just do not have the power, or they're just enamored by the power of these drug companies. Here we're talking about Bayer and Johnson & Johnson, two of the just behemoths, two huge multi-billion-dollar drug companies.
On Xarelto, so we're talking about Xarelto here. In Xarelto, you have these huge companies coming in and basically pushing the FDA around, holding out these gifts, if you would, for the FDA types, saying, I know you're only making $120,000. Come with us and make $300,000. And oh, by the way, can you help us with getting approval on this drug?
That's part of it. But another part, Pap, that I think a lot of people don't understand is the lack of power that the FDA has. They don't have much power. And I actually found a document the other day when I was researching this topic where the FDA, someone with the FDA wrote, and they said, look, and it's the core allegation in this case is that a simple blood test could improve patient safety. And the FDA says, look, the data appears to show that a blood test could improve patient safety. But for whatever reason, the drug companies aren't interested in pursuing this avenue. And so the FDA acknowledges that they just do not have the power to require the companies to do what the FDA believes is right. What are ludicrous.
What are other important points about this Xarelto story that really just cause you to get angry when you know there's how many people this is killing?
Well, for the start of the matter, we don't need it. We have a drug that a tried, true, tested called warfarin that doctors have been using for 50 years, and it's cheap. It's $300 a year. These new guys on the market, they're selling it to our grandparents, and they're telling them it's cheap. It's cheap and quick, and you don't have to go to the doctor anymore. But they're charging them $3,000 a year for this drug.
You don't have to monitor. Their argument is you don't have to monitor the blood amount.
Exactly. You don't have to do the regular blood test, which is true. But the fact of the matter is, if you did a simple one-time blood test or a yearly blood test, you could greatly improve patient safety, and they know this. There's a recent huge expose in the British Medical Journal just in the last couple weeks where they said that the same thing is true for another one of the drugs in the class. And so there's no.
Wait. When you say drugs in the class, what do you mean? There's a class of drugs that you're talking about here. It's not just Xarelto; it's other ones too.
It's Xarelto, Eliquis, and Pradaxa, and there's a new one that's coming down the pike. I don't know the trade name of that yet. I think it's called Indoxapan is its generic name.
Okay, but we're talking about Xarelto here, and the
Yes, sir.
FDA is doing what with Xarelto? Are they doing anything to stop this?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, and they're going to get into it. They're going to dive in. Their market share is going up. People have been paying more attention to it. I know that there's a lot more attention to the whole class of drugs in general, and I think eventually we're going to get to a place and a point in time where all these drugs require at least a one-time blood test just to make sure you're getting the right dose. And that's going to happen. But I think some other concerning things about Xarelto is, again, if you dive into the data, is that the way you measure how well this drug performs is you do a head-to-head clinical trial, which is what they did here with Xarelto. They compared it to warfarin. But the thing about warfarin is you have to constantly change the dose, and you can measure how well you do that. And they did it very poorly. They managed warfarin very, very poorly, and yet Xarelto still had more strokes and more bleeds than warfarin, even in poorly controlled warfarin. And that's another one of the reasons why the people at the FDA voted against approving the drug, the actual scientists, the doctors. But the bureaucrats, again, overruled them.
Okay, so obviously if somebody's on Xarelto right now, the doctor most of the time is not going to know a lot of these issues we're talking about. I mean, that sounds odd, but the doctor really won't even know that maybe the clinicals aren't quite right, or what the clinicals are actually showing, or that maybe they shouldn't be on this drug at all, because there's something called direct-to-consumer marketing. Explain that, would you?
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's market research that shows that 9 out of 10 doctors will prescribe a drug to a patient if the patient asks for it by name. And that's why in the United States, drug companies, pharmaceutical companies spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on direct-to-consumer advertising, which is really it's really asinine. It's crazy that why would you be advertising to patients when the patients don't have the power or the ability to actually write these prescriptions? It's the doctor's choice. It's the doctor's decision. Yet they know the influence they have through these patients, and the doctors just don't have the time to do all the research, and they ultimately just have to trust the FDA and their peers and the drug companies that they're giving them safe medicine.
And what a mistake that is! What a terrible mistake that is. Ned McWilliams, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pat.